welcome to another episode of Export 101. My name's Ben Rye. I'm a trademark attorney at Poynton Partners, and I am the hostess with the mostess for Export 101 show. And today we have Derek Stewart, Business Development Manager from Flat Planet, and we are going to talk about staffing today. And it's wonderful to have him here because if you're a business in Australia and you're looking to export, I mean, it's so hard to get staff in Australia as it is, and to also structure in such a way that it's, it suits the business in terms of the requirements, but also how do you go about finding the right staff for the business overseas? So, Derek, we're going to try to answer some of those questions today, and thank you for being here today.
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
Yeah. Maybe just start out with just give us some information about you and your background in terms of your specialization with staffing.
Yeah, so I actually started my career in accounting in sort of big corporate professional services, and then spent 5 years living and working over in Manila in the Philippines, which is where I learned about the international staffing and offshore staffing industry. Came back to Australia, and now I'm more on the client-facing side in Australia, but again, taking that experience from living and working in Asia.
Yep, excellent. So, if what are the staffing considerations should a e-commerce or an exporter consider when they want to start exporting overseas? Do they need staff overseas, or can they start exporting?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think a few follow-up questions or points I would clarify. Are they only selling to English-speaking markets? That might be the first one. Otherwise, there can be multilingual concerns if they're selling into a non-English-speaking market. Even if they are selling into an English-speaking market, it might be the opposite time zone, like Canada or the US. So then considerations around staffing hours, because the time people are shopping in the US probably wouldn't match their office hours or customer service hours in Australia. Whereas maybe they've got an APAC market they're selling into, but English isn't the prime language, like maybe somewhere in Asia. And then in those ones, time zone's not the issue, it's more language. And that's when those sort of questions are what I would sort of usually chat to a client about. And then other things can be sort of skill sets. As well, it depends, I would ask, are they exporting a product or a service? If you're selling a physical product that has to move between countries, that might impact your staffing considerations on the ground. And even if you're exporting a service, like a professional service to an overseas client, are you delivering that in person or remotely? And all those factors I would sort of ask as follow-up questions to start thinking about your international staffing strategies.
Well, interesting you mentioned whether it's a product or service. With the freight being so expensive at the moment because of the aftermath of COVID and the freight industry and transport industry is in chaos, I had a client tell me that normally to get a container load from China, he was paying $8,000 and now it's $20,000 just to get one over here. And so therefore, I think if you're doing a product exporting products, maybe one of the considerations is that you might want to set up an office in that country that you're exporting to and maybe staff it there. Or there are other options as outsourcing to another country with a 1-800, with a telephone number that can service the clients in that country, but they don't actually have to be in that country. So maybe you might want to comment about whether staffing needs to be in that country, or can it be decentralized elsewhere to service the products or services that are being exported by Australian companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a rise of what some people have called the micro multinational. So often when people say the word multinational, you think big corporate, thousands of staff, but often now you can be a small business, even with 1, 2, 5 employees. And there's no reason why they all have to be in the same country, especially if you're ready or you plan to service customers overseas through a physical product or service export. So I think that accessibility for global staff, all the technology we've seen the last couple of years for collaborating, working together remotely. Again, I always like to get into the details with the clients. So I would often ask them, is it a direct-to-consumer product where you're responsible for the fulfillment, or is it a retail distribution where you've just got to get the product to a reseller, or if it's a service, is it through a channel partner, and do they have a lot of on-the-ground infrastructure? like sales teams
Yeah.
and implementation consultants. If they do, you might not need as much of your own staff, but if you're selling direct to consumer, you're delivering the product, you don't have a lot of middlemen or support
Yeah.
on the ground, that's when you'd probably, definitely consider more in-person staff in the countries that you're selling to or servicing.
Right, right. So what are the pros and cons of doing it all yourself, yourselves, instead of outsourcing it to others? I mean, I think a lot of businesses think that they can actually run the business from Australia. A lot of people are selling e-commerce, but what I also found was that even the e-commerce businesses, even though you have the internet and you can sell globally, however, how do you service? You can ship a product from here, but what if that product fails there? Where does that product get returned to? Is there warranty on that? So there's a lot of more consideration than just shipping the product over there. And as I mentioned before, a lot of people, I think the freight costs more than the actual product that they're buying at the moment. So maybe it's actually not a good strategy to export directly to those countries, but more looking at exporting and staffing it adequately for those countries.
Yeah, so I think the core decision, like you said, is when can you do something yourself and when do you use a trusted partner? I mentioned a few things like language and time zone that vary between countries. There's actually a lot, from currency to labour laws, corporation laws, consumer laws, trademark laws, as you would know well, that vary per country. So when you do try and do it all yourself, at a small scale, it's not often an issue if you just have a few orders here and there, or one client overseas. But if you really want to ramp up that client base, the sales, the marketing, the delivery, that's when you're going to quickly start running into, like you said, not just shipping. COVID restrictions, as we know, can vary within a state, let alone within a country. And so if you're selling into multiple markets, the COVID restrictions can be different even within the local geographies of those markets. And that's why at a certain scale, it makes sense, instead of trying to incorporate a company in multiple countries, employ people yourself in multiple countries, try and figure out, like I said, everything from accounting, law, finance, and suppliers in all those places, to use a supplier that already has that infrastructure in place and, for example, can do a labour hire.
The expertise there.
Yeah, the local expertise, the market conditions, they understand the business environment. Again, if it's a physical product, the customs side of things, it's very different between countries, but also you can sort of piggyback on their infrastructure to employ staff, payroll staff, have people on the ground ready to go, versus trying to set up 10 different companies in 10 different countries in order to do it all yourself.
And I'd say that maybe staffing in those countries with a bit of research, you could potentially avoid a lot of mistakes, as you said, cultural mistakes in terms of the name of the product itself. I mean, I know there's been a few mistakes done by multinationals where they've called a car a swear word in Brazil, and they didn't know that. It was one of their best sellers elsewhere, but in that particular country it was translated into a swear word, and therefore they didn't sell that many cars. So what are the most common mistakes that businesses make when they look for staff or looking to staff overseas to increase their export market?
Yeah, I think it's just like the previous question about doing it yourself. Sometimes, especially if you're an Australian business owner, a lot of the laws and regulations are actually quite good in Australia on the global scale. If you look at it, it's pretty simple to incorporate a company. It's fairly easy to employ people. Contracts are very enforceable. Most things are fairly paperless and transparent. There's a lot of government support and advice, grants, initiatives, programs. Again, depending on which countries you're exporting to, they can either be similar but just very different, like a lot of support but it's very different to access it, or maybe a lot of that infrastructure isn't in place. Even moving money internationally can become a big challenge. Again, a lot of international service providers are more set up for the traditional large multinational, so they don't service the micro multinationals as well. So I think the mistake in staffing is some people think, well, I have freelancers, contractors in Australia, I'll just do the same overseas. But again, the labour laws can be very different overseas. The penalties for breaching the labour laws can also be very different. And even figuring out things like compensation is that hourly? Is it monthly? Is it annual? Does the employer provide health insurance?
Do they provide super?
Yeah, is there super or pension or social security equivalents?
Yeah.
Are there in some countries like
Minimum wage? Wage. Minimum
yeah,
wage.
minimum wage. Other regulations are work hours when overtime applies. In the Philippines, once you have more than 50 staff, you actually have to have an on-site nurse. So
Okay.
we have that in our company so that people can sort of benefit from that because again, in like the Philippines, the employer is responsible for doing the employees' tax returns, health insurance, other things that if you didn't know that and you just think, oh, I'll just, get some freelance or contractors, it might work when you've got one or two, but as you scale and expand, you realise some of the cracks and things you didn't know were different. And then if you enter a new country and a new market, you've got a whole nother set of complexity, and that's where using a trusted partner can help. Even if it's just an advisor, even if you implement it yourself, it's just getting the advice before you do it. Because it can be hard to unwind decisions as well. Like you mentioned branding and failed names launched, but also internally staffing. You can cause internal staffing issues if it's not done correctly.
Well, staffing is a big issue even locally for businesses here. If you train someone up, that still costs money. And if you don't, if the culture's not right, if they don't get the right training and they leave very quickly within, I don't know, a year or even less, you've just wasted all that time and money in resourcing, for that business, and they've left. And then you've got to start it over again. And not only that, you've got to then also be careful about how you exit them as well in each country. So it is important, as you said, to go and seek a trusted advisor in staffing to ensure that that you've got the right people in the team to give you the best success to sell your product overseas and also locally as well. So, and talking about staffing, what are the trends so far that you've noticed recently? What were the staffing trends?
I think a lot of people have massively upgraded their technology, which is fantastic to see, because behind every business, even if you're moving a physical product, there's technology, whether it's a customer database, whether it's online marketing, whether it's customer support software. There's a internal IT infrastructure, data management that's dramatically improved with COVID. A lot of companies for the first time are realising how to set up their internal IT infrastructure. And once it's set up correctly, if you have someone working from home in Australia, it's not as complex to have someone who's not in the physical premises and network work. So I've seen really positive trends in some businesses that aren't always on the cutting edge of technology, deciding that technology is going to be the future and the driver of their business. And even if they go to the cloud, they don't have physical servers, well, again, that opens opportunities overseas. And again, if they have centralised systems, whether it's a VoIP phone, whether it's file sharing, whether it's more sophisticated digital marketing, they can actually market globally, sell globally, and staff globally.
I've had some discussions with previous clients recently about many of them have got patents and they're also getting trademarks because they're launching a new product, and there's a big market, let's say in Saudi Arabia. They're going there to set it up. They're probably going to have a sales agent that they trust. But the question is, how do they staff it for if there's problems with the product? So a company like yours, which outsources, and it can be anywhere in the world, do you offer a service that is like 24 hours, or do you staff it so that you can service different time zones?
Yeah, that's a great question. We essentially run a 24/7 by 365 office in the Philippines as well as Vietnam and Malaysia, so that we have clients doing a local sort of Singapore shift. We have clients doing an early shift, which is sort of Australia or New Zealand. We have clients doing a mid shift, which is sort of the UK and Europe. And we have clients working a night shift for North America. So wherever the client is in the world, we have multiple teams that run 24/7, and that allows them across maybe it's phone, email, live chat, other support to serve their customers at any time. Others might not be 24/7, but they can offer extended hours and do that in a way that's often not practical for sort of white collar roles in Australia to run a double shift or a night shift for staff and to support their clients wherever they are in the world. And if you sell to enough countries, eventually you become a 24/7 business.
Yep.
And we help clients as well as seasonal clients. We have a client who's a ski field in America, so very busy when everyone's going to the ski fields, very quiet the rest of the year. And also like a client who runs an aircon franchise in Australia, very busy in summer, quiet the rest of the year. So they have a baseline staff and then they ramp up and we build a big team for them in their peak season and ramp back down and support them. So all those flexible models we work with based on the demands and needs of the client.
Yeah. From your examples and from my client's example, it seems like you do have to have maybe localized staff on the ground, but maybe for the admin, the customer service side of things where it's quotations or just taking customer inquiries via email, it can be done remotely. Outsourcing it could be a really big help for any exporters looking to fully staff and provide the level of customer service to the clientele in those countries that they're exporting their products or services to. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we actually have a lot of clients who aren't exporting. They just service a single market in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Australia. But they understand the power of sourcing internationally, and that's why they come to us with back office staff, and they build a bit of their own shared service centre for various back office capabilities. And over time, they see the opportunities as they become more confident internally, being a micro multinational with multiple markets, and they say, hey, why can't we generate revenue instead of just having part of our payroll and our costs in Asia Pacific? Why can't we generate revenue there too? And that's once they've got that base and that confidence and those trusted partners, maybe they've visited to see their own team, and then they realise we don't have to be a local or domestic or national business. We could actually be a global business. So that's often the pathway many go to before they have the confidence to export their product or service, actually internally staff offshore. And then they open...
Test the water.
Yeah.
Test the water first to see if that market's going to grow for them. And if they do grow and they do need local staff, they can staff there. But the good thing about your services would be that if the person that was starting out in their company and they didn't, let's say it didn't work out, they don't have to do the hiring or the firing. You would take care, or your firm would take care of all of that. So it takes the headaches away from really having to know the local laws and everything else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We provide essentially a plug-and-play solution. So they don't need to incorporate a company, don't need to get office space, don't need to buy IT equipment. We've got everything in place so they can plug into that without all the capital expenditure, setup cost, effort of setting up a new market. They can plug into what we've set up over the last 12 years of doing business in Southeast Asia. And again, at a certain scale, they can have more options become available the bigger they are, but when they're starting they can dip their toe in the water very easily to get a feel for it without all the risk and cost and of doing it themselves.
Yeah, I think that is a very reasonable plan, because you wouldn't want to hire someone overseas and then the product doesn't do well and then having to let them go, within a couple of months, because it's people's lives that you're also trying to service over there, and it's better actually to just potentially just outsource it to recruitment agencies overseas, or an agency like yours where you've got outsourced assistant staffing in Southeast Asia. So just a question, a personal question is, what have you learned living overseas and witnessing, I guess, the employment overseas? What are your learnings?
Yeah, I think it was fascinating spending half a decade living in Asia, working in Asia. You realise how different certain things are that aren't always apparent. You might say, oh, well, there's a McDonald's in this country, therefore it's all the same. But then you look a bit more closely at the menu and you realise, oh, actually a lot of the food's different. And then you understand more about the business and you realise maybe, for example, one person owns a licence to every McDonald's in the country. And as you go deeper and deeper, and the more you live in a country, the more nuanced layers of the business environment you see. And again, the more businesses, once you're there for a while, you meet people who are arriving and you see interesting patterns in what people think versus what works. You see, again, barriers that aren't always obvious when you first arrive. You think, oh, well, obviously I'll just do this. And then you realise the hiccups that you're going to run into. But also you see opportunities that aren't always apparent when you first arrive if you just have a tourist level view of a country. So yeah, I think I learned the opportunities and the risks, and it takes literally years before you have a full appreciation in the same way some American companies or British companies find when they expand into Australia. The subtleties of the culture, of the demographics, of the population, of the labour force, of the company environment are quite different. So some multinationals often setting up trying to export into Australia, Asia Pacific, learn it the hard way in the same way as Australian companies. So I think it's just knowing and respecting those differences, even if at the surface countries might appear similar. English is spoken, you think, I know how to run a business here. It's actually quite different per country, and that's what I really came to appreciate in my years overseas.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this segment. We've learned quite a bit in terms of if you're looking to export and wanting to staff overseas, there are many options you have. You can hire staff on the ground in that country. You can appoint a distributor or a sales agent there. You can engage a recruitment agency locally to maybe have some short-term staffing, or a company like Derek's where you outsource and they don't virtually sit in those countries, but sit in the Philippines, Vietnam, or Malaysia, was it?
So that's our 3 offices and where the staff are.
That's right. And no one would really know where they sit ultimately. What their function would be to answer the phones, to be trained up to respond to emails, and basically to provide a level of customer service that will give your product or services the highest chance of succeeding in those countries that you're looking to export. So if you've got any questions, feel free to contact Import Export TV and ask a question of us, the presenters here today. And thank you very much, Derek, for joining me. And I hope you've learned a little bit of staffing in this episode.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben.